I just wrote something about him for Jacobin, because I was really struck by looking at his signature policy proposal. So a lot of what Ramaswamy wants is what all the Republicans want, to invade Mexico, for example. All the Republican candidates right now, I think, on record to say they want to do that. But Ramaswamy's most interesting suggestion is that the automatic voting rights be held until the age of 25. So 18 to 24-year-olds would be disenfranchised, which is not even the most interesting to this to me, because, look, what exactly the cutoff? I mean, 25 is awfully high, but exactly the cutoff for various measures of adulthood, driving, voting, drinking, etc., is a little culturally arbitrary anyway. I suppose 25 might sound less crazy to me, for the sake of argument, if I grown up in a society which set it at least a few years older than it does. But what really struck me about this is that this would just, on Ramaswamy's proposal, this would just be the cutoff for automatic voting rights, but he's not going to say 18 to 24-year-olds can't vote no matter what. He's willing to allow them to vote if they jump through one of a few different hoops. So there's a poll test option, pass civic, some kind of civics test. Great history there. They can get jobs as first responders, or my favorite option is that he thinks that they should be able to earn the right to vote by serving in the military, which I have to say, when I heard that part, that you can get voting rights by serving in the Army, it immediately made me think about this.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part, too.
They're doing their part. Are you? Join the Mobile Infantry and save the world. Service guarantees citizenship.
My favorite thing here is that it seems clear that a push to raise the voting age and only let military veterans below the age of 25 vote is a way to reconservatize the electorate through disenfranchisement. The problem is, to truly do that in this day and age, you'd need to have the voting cutoff age be about 55. So it probably won't even work, not that they could do it anyway. It's pretty clear that there's also some real worry right now that even the poverty draft isn't working. So, most of the military at the current moment, it's military families, it's declining base, the military itself is declining in its membership. It's now 3/4, multi-generational households from the middle class, but that's when the military is in an operative mode. It tends to be a lot more poor in it, or, if we go back pre-Vietnam War, a lot more draftees. And you can't really bring back the draft because that would probably lead to less military actions and police actions being viable, because there'd be a lot more pushback on it. You can't
also, you'd be incorporating unreliable elements within the security apparatus.
Yeah,
you draft people; they're no longer gatekeeping.
Yeah, if you incorporate every able-bodied 18-year-old, period, you just taught a bunch of leftists how to use guns. So,
And conscription democratizes foreign policy to a certain extent, because everybody has like a fundamental stake in it. Danny Bessner always talks about this. One of the reasons that foreign policy is so detached from any democratic control is because in order to exercise it, you don't actually have to involve that many people. It's not a live political question in the way that something like Vietnam was, because people were either drafted or they were scared that they were going to get drafted, or their kids were going to get drafted, or their family was going to get drafted. So God forbid a draft, because that is you know, I mean, I think tactically the left should support a draft, but I think
I will say this much, because I remember, you know, I'm old enough to remember this being a argument that came up a lot in, you know, like the early 2000s, right? This was a big Bush era argument. I think John Conyers actually, you know, whatever. It's obviously there's no chance of it passing, but, you know, introduced like a conscription bill for exactly that reason you guys have been talking about during the Bush years. I will say that this idea that a draft sort of automatically means more resistance to intervention, I do wonder about it, because I think about places that either currently have or have had a draft. You know, I think about Israel. You know, I think about the United States. You know, during the decades, you know, before, you know, the Vietnam War, you know, when Korea was happening, etc. Think about, you know, South Korea. Not that, you know, not South Korea is sending troops around the world, but, you know, it's like but also, you know, I like doesn't you know, doesn't exactly have massive draft resistance or anything. And I wonder if, like, Vietnam, like we're sort of treating Vietnam as like the kind of standard way that having a draft plays out, but that was actually relatively unusual, that you had like a big war where people were dying all the time, and a draft, and a country that wasn't really conservative enough to just kind of lay down and accept it.
Well, don't forget too that the Eastern Bloc also had mandatory military service, including the possibility of deployment to Afghanistan for Soviet soldiers. Mm-hmm. And that had a very similar effect to Vietnam in the late Soviet Union. Similarly, conscription extraordinarily unpopular in countries like Poland, a real lightning rod for anti-regime opposition, to the point where by the end of the system, 1/3 or more of eligible conscripts were just getting a free pass, like whatever bullshit pretext they came up with was getting rubber stamped in order to keep them out, because enforcing that service on the type of population, oppositional population you had in Poland, was just recognized as being regime threatening.
So the one thing I will say about the U.S. in the period before Vietnam is the earliest opposition to Vietnam actually came from Korean vets, not from the youth. The stats actually back that up. There were the beginnings of the Vietnam War were actually more unpopular in the 30 to 40 set than it was in the 20 to 30 set during the first years of the war. That was to flip later. I actually, you know, it's a hard thing for a socialist to be honest about. On one hand, I actually do think that a draft is remarkably. The reason why it works and democratizes military service is that if you actually use it, it's monstrous. Mm-hmm. Like, unless you're using it in the case of a defensive war, in which case you don't need it. But the other thing is that in a socialist society, one would have to actually advocate that such functions, and not just military functions, police functions, all kinds of social service functions, are shared by everybody in the society. So you do have to, you know, there's not a simple answer to that. But I will also say that it's also objectively true that I think some of the hope that a draft democratizes the use of the military is based off the premise that the deployment of the military is democratic, which after the Police Powers Act in the United States, and that's when we quit declaring war ever, is a questionable assumption.
The War Powers Act? Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, the War Powers Act is actually to rein in the police powers given to it with the UN Treaty. Excuse me. So, but all of them end up, because the War Powers Act is actually supposed to limit what Eisenhower claimed under the UN treaty. But all of them enable you to easily invest U.S. soldiers into a war without declaring war, because you can stick boots in the ground. And what are you going to do? Is Congress going to defund it once that happens? They never have. I mean, lately,
kind of the very end of Vietnam, but yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, while we are talking about Vietnam, one other last thing I did want to hit before we got to the main event for tonight is that I've been off for the last few weeks. We had we ran the New York City live show video instead of an episode last Monday. The Monday before that, our good friend Jason Miles came in and guest hosted. So it's been about 3 weeks since we did a normal episode, and in that time, it's a little dated now, but when a friend of the show, has a big birthday, a big milestone birthday, I don't want to completely neglect it. So do just want to say Henry Kissinger has hit his 100 since the last episode of the show, and I don't know exactly what he did to celebrate that occasion. If there's if there's like footage from any event that was held on his actual 100th birthday. I haven't seen it, but I did, while researching that article for Jacobin about Kissinger's 100th birthday, I did find some footage of Kissinger at his old boss Richard Nixon's posthumous 100th birthday party. I think Nixon died when he was in his 80s, maybe. That was he died in the late 90s, and I think he was in his 80s at that point. But posthumously, there was a 100th birthday celebration for Richard Nixon, and Dr. Kissinger was there, and he gave a birthday toast to Richard Nixon, which we can see here, him giving the toast, and then some of Dr. Kuba's colleagues lifted their glasses upon hearing it.
It is my honor to propose a toast to Richard Nixon, patriot, president, and above all, peacemaker. And American.
Made Cuba run away.
Yeah, he's crying. He's just going to cry, and he's going to get his wine for tricky. Oh, he's quieted himself.
Yeah, Cuba, you're muted if you had meant to say something.
After that toast, I needed to get more wine.
Well, he made peace with China,
Yeah, I mean that is the germ of truth in it, that Nixon was willing to pursue pragmatic detente with China, and for that matter the Soviet Union. Although I have to say, what I immediately flashed to when I was watching that toast to Richard Nixon as a peacemaker from Henry Kissinger is a classic quote from a transcript of a conversation between Kissinger and his deputy national security advisor, in which they're talking about the instructions that Kissinger had gotten from Richard Nixon about the bombing campaign in Cambodia. So this is Alexander Haig is the deputy he's talking to, who would later be the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe under Jimmy Carter, and then the Secretary of State under Reagan. So bipartisanship. But this is the exchange they have that you can see in the transcript, because of course it's a recorded White House call. Kissinger, 2, he wants a massive bombing campaign in Cambodia. He doesn't want to hear anything. It's an order. It's to be done. Anything that flies on anything that moves. You got that? And then the transcript says, couldn't hear but sounded like Haig laughing.
Classic.
Good stuff. Lovely people.
I mean, arguably, Kissinger is the great digger of communism, right? Because the Sino-Soviet split being maintained by the particular way détente was pursued actually does make the continued viability of the Soviet Union really, really hard. Not that that started the Sino-Soviet split. That probably goes all the way back to the 1920s. But, I don't know. He's evil enough that I think he might never die. Like, I've just decided that maybe I'm not usually a metaphysician or anything, but I don't know. Maybe enough babies have been sacrificed in his name that he's just never going to die.
But let me play Kissinger defense. How about this? There you go.
Sure.
So, Kissinger is despised not just on the socialist left, but a large swath of liberal opinion despises Kissinger as well.
I will say just on the subject of liberal opinion and Kissinger, that that's certainly like mainstream liberal Democrats who get elected president, by and large like him. Remember that
Sure.
Hillary Clinton in the 2016 primary debates said that he was a good friend and trusted advisor, and then Bernie brought up Salvador Allende, and everybody sort of reacted as if he was just making up names out of thin air, and in fact, apparently, after Nixon left office, Ford kept him on in his dual role as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. He finally left the White House after Ford left. But every single president after Ford and before Biden, that would be Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, all at some point had Kissinger over to the White House for foreign policy discussions and advice about war and diplomacy. Drinking Chrome. The only exception so far is Joe Biden. Now, of course, there's still time, but the thing that I really want to note about this is, as much as I would like to believe that the reason that he hasn't gotten an invite to the Biden White House is that Joe Biden disapproves of all the genocides, I think it's a lot more likely that he's actually not invited to the Biden White House for not being enough of a warmonger, because early on in the war in Ukraine, he sort of made some vague comments about how, pursuing negotiations might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Or Biden might think he still works for Richard Nixon.
That's another. No, but amongst sort of left liberal academics and media and journalist sides, he's kind of,
Anthony Bourdain has that famous quote that once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands.
Yeah. So there is a significant portion of left liberal opinion that despises Nixon. But, as managers of American empire go, he's not sui generously worse than some of the other people who have come up.
Zbigniew Brzezinski is kind of like the Democratic Nixon
version. Yeah, you've got Mika's daddy, and I don't mean Joe Scarborough. I mean her real daddy, and also look at all the neocons. Look at Hillary Clinton's behavior as Secretary of State. Just look at the entire American foreign policy establishment of the last 40 years. When people, people single out Henry Kissinger as the sui generis evil, I think there's a tendency in that singling out to kind of put the sins of American empire on this one guy and say, like, oh, look, it's this really bad guy, Nixon. Nixon had this Henry Kissinger guy who was this particularly evil guy. He was just a kind of foreign policy realist exercising foreign policy realism in a way that foreign policy realists do, right? Which is like you look at the world as a power politics game. I mean, is that like worse than the stuff the neocons did? Is that worse than Samantha Powers and the right to intervention? If we look at the utilitarian cost of it all, the war on terror is like, pretty barbarous as things go. So I think go ahead.
I think that the argument made about Henry Kissinger, the most persuasive takedown is actually Christopher Hitchens, who challenges that whole, he was just a manager of empire doing what realpolitik required of him, in pointing out that the outcome of many of Kissinger's signature initiatives ended up boomeranging back on the United States.
Oh yeah, I'm not. I think realism.
So
foreign policy realism is a shitty way of looking at the world, and it's like it's not an endorsement of realism.
And Hitchens, his great point is like, look, the issue isn't that this guy was an unprincipled, was ruthless and unprincipled in maintaining stability. The real case against him is that he was a geopolitical arsonist. He created instability wherever he went. And even when he did secure a pro-American outcome, it often was needlessly costly to the United States, not to mention everybody else involved. But,
So I will say that in the Jackman article, it's actually called Henry Kissinger is a disgusting war criminal, but the rock goes deeper than him. And ultimately, the argument of the article is a version of part of what Gene said, right? That it's I don't think it negates the Hitchens point about Kissinger as a geopolitical arsonist who didn't really guarantee stability in practice, but that as much as I will be certainly not shed any tears when if and when Kissinger eventually dies, taking into account Vard's point about how he might not, I will be not disappointed when that happens. In fact, I'm regularly disappointed when I see Kissinger's name trending on Twitter and I realize that it's not because he's dead. And it's certainly, if in the spectacularly unlikely event that he actually had to see the inside of a courtroom before he died, I think that would be a fantastic outcome. But I also think it's a mistake, and this is ultimately the argument of the piece, to think that there's anything really unique about Kissinger. I think that if anything, I think maybe the unique thing about Kissinger is just that he's sort of so plain-spoken about it, right? That he, anything that flies and anything that moves, or what's the classic Kissinger line about Salvador Allende? I don't see why countries should be let go communist just because its voters are irresponsible. That the fact that he's willing to say stuff like that out loud, and if anything, sort of cultivates this very evil persona. I think maybe makes him seem more unique than he really is. I think the very fact
I remember one quote that he had. He was selecting some response to a particular question that was being circulated in the media. He said, okay, let's go with this one. It's very useful for our interests. It doesn't reveal too much. And it also has the secondary benefit of being true.
I actually was thinking about this the other day because I remember noting Kissinger's passing, and we were talking about realism. I don't know what realism actually is, because both Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski are realists, but also Peter Zeihan and what's his name, John Mearsheimer, are both realists. And their politics are diametrically opposed, except that they both dislike China, but their answer to China is remarkably different, even if they're both warlike. And I bring that up because when we talk about these things, I'm like, okay, well, the number one, if we want to talk about like the real time that America had evil emperors who were competent and also not particularly ghoulish, only basically ghoulish, you got to go back to like George Kennan, which is 50s, 60s, pre-Kissinger. And there is something true. We talk about how Kissinger is the person who just said it out loud. I mean, I think I'm always like taken aback by how much foreign policy and military advisors now will just say like they'll let the game out verbatim. I suggest if people want to see this, Mearsheimer, actually a little bit before Kissinger gave a talk in Australia, that I was like, he is so blatant about what he's advocating in regards to war in China that he might as well be anti-war by accident.
Well, I think there's a lot of that with opposition to American involvement in Ukraine. There are a lot of people in that position who are pretty upfront about the fact that their reason is that is that being in a global confrontation with Russia distracts us from being in a global confrontation with China like we should. But yeah, so I did just want to plug this interview with Daniel Bessner and Jacobin from almost exactly a year ago today. How should the left think about realism in foreign policy? I think he has some nuanced and worthwhile things to say there. But yeah, I would also urge that, like, just the fact that Kissinger not only has not been put on trial in any of the decades since his involvement in these crimes, but that other than Biden so far, everybody's admitted him to the White House. In that time, he's still treated as an elder statesman, is maybe in itself a sign that he's not really as unique as we might like to think. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.